Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program segment we call the Critical Post Chicago Re- Investigation Reports. In order for us to completely understand the nature of our circumstances here and in the UK, because what's true for America is likewise true in the British Commonwealth, and that is we're not living in democratic republics or parliamentary republican democracies. We're living under the yoke of a vast college of corporations and the largest of the banks, along with the largest of the transnational corporations, who game the political systems to buy the governments they want in these countries. And that's a fact. We're going to corroborate that. To demonstrate the reliability of this assertion, we have prepared some research to show you in this brief section of broadcast programming. Now, on the screen, I'm going to bring it up right here. On the screen, what you see is a study that was conducted by Stefania Vitali, James B. Glatfelder, and Stefano Battiston of the Systems Design Company in Zurich, Switzerland, and the title of the work is called The Network of Global Corporate Control. Now, this study got very small mentions in a couple of the faux news media blogs back when it was published. I believe it was published in September of 2011. Nonetheless, it received some back page notice, and that was it. They don't want you to know how you're being gamed. Now we'll get into the rest of the stuff. There's a lot of ways that the people of the British Commonwealth and the people of the United States are being gamed. And we're going to get into it. There's a lot of different ways that this is going on. But what you see in this particular clip is the color coding scheme that shows where the cross-pollinated boards of directors intersect for the largest transnational corporations. Those are the dots in red. According to this report, there's approximately 147 of these corporations, and that what they do is these corporations working in tandem with each other with cross-pollinated boards of directors form super entities. In other words, basically, like many in radio have been talking about, and others in other parts of the media have been talking about, they talk about corporatism. This is corporatism on steroids. Now, on the right of the screen, what you see is the major financial sector companies which are integrated into this lattice of control. Okay? And they are, to name a few, this is not all, but to name a few: Franklin Resources, Prudential Financial, Commerce Bank AG, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, AXA, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank AG, Merrill Lynch, Barclays Bank PLC, Bank of America Corporation, UBS AG, JP Morgan Chase, State Street Corporation, T. Rowe Price, Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns. And Lehman Brothers, I guess, was still in business when they started to do some of this reporting. But, of course, Lehman Brothers, even though it's mentioned in this lattice right here, they're obviously, defunct at this point in time. They're the ones that were designated to take the fall for the bubble collapse in 2007-2008. Now, this is an amazing set of circumstances regarding control of our daily lives. We are being, in my opinion, all of us, we are being managed. The money supply is corrupt. The government corporations are corrupt. And we're going to get into something else in a second. We are immersed in government corporations. And if you don't believe that these are corporations to make a profit, there is something called the Government Corporation Control Act. Look it up. You can look it up. It's really easy to find. If you can make head or sense of it once you look it up and you start reading it, that's a different story. But being that we're in an election season, we're in the middle of the midterms right now as this report is being filed, and coming into the beginning of the presidential election season, I've got a radio clip I'd like you to listen to in a brief moment here. That is from a man whose name is Craig B. Hewlett. But before I get into Mr. Hewlett, understand something, people. The Federal Election Commission is what controls elections in this country. And that government corporation, its specific purpose is to make sure that it is so expensive to run for national office in this country that only one of two government party corporations can possibly do it. And they're aligned, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. That's where all the money goes. And if you take a look at the Federal Election Commission and what one has to do in order to even get a seat at the table, to get on a national ballot, it's an amazing set of work, and you need an army of lawyers to do it. An army of lawyers at $750 an hour in private practice, and probably $250 an hour or some ridiculous fee. I mean, this is an industry all by itself. The election industry. A lot of people making a hell of a lot of money on it because all these corporations that you see on the screen, and more that we're going to name, and more that are named at the back of this report. Let's see if we go back to page, I believe it's 33. The top 50 control holders right here on page 33 of this PDF report. Now, funny, at the bottom is China Petrochemical Group. Okay? These are the corporations that swing money back and forth between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and they give to each equally. And then you're going to hear the way that elections are decided in this country on the national level. And Mr. Hewlett, Mr. Craig B. Hewlett, in this radio interview clip that I got and listened to, is going to explain how it's done. Now, who is Craig B. Hewlett? Well, Craig B. Hewlett is a terrorism expert. He's an ATF, he was a consultant to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms unit in the federal government as a, he was an expert about the growth of the militia movement. He's a former special assistant to Congressman Jack Metcalf. He's a former member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he's got a lot of big corporations as his in his client base. This man sits in the war rooms with these people, and he is paid to conduct research, and he's an excellent research in my estimation and opinion. Okay, and on his website, what he shows is the overlap between the federal government and the corporations, and he does it in a number of sectors. For instance, in this particular PDF or graphic, the federal government and big oil. Can you see that? There's the overlap. When he, at the time that he conducted this, which I'm not sure exactly which administration this was, it was probably during the George Bush administration. Federal government and big oil, and the names and where they came from. Okay, the federal government and Comcast. The federal government and General Electric. The federal government and Goldman Sachs. The federal government and the media. The federal government and Monsanto. Now you can bet that if it was true in one administration, it's been true in many administrations. This isn't anything new. This is what's going on in this country. You go to the polls and vote. Why? It doesn't matter if you vote or you don't vote. Your vote does not count. It does not mean anything. And if you think it does, and if you think these parties are anything but a big game, then I've got a bridge to sell you. Now that's my opinion. But Mr. Hewlett, who is far more intelligent in terms of his research than I'll ever be, is the kind of man, in my estimation, and I've listened to hours upon hours on Craig B. Hewlett on the radio. I've read his website. We're going to contact him. This man does the kind of research that we need to listen to. Okay? It is a big sham. Everything that you think you know about this country is a big charade. The president's a puppet. The banks run this country. And as a matter of fact, the banks run just about every country on the face of the earth. But that's for another show. They run the countries. The governments they're in the business of convincing us that the debt that these dimwits create, that it's our debt. That's what they're in the business of doing. But it's not our debt. But they're in the business of convincing us it is our debt. So therefore, income taxes. Everybody in this country has been brainwashed into thinking that their private property, which is their body, is subject to a tax. Because from the time you're an infant to the time you retire, if you worked for a corporation before you ever got all of your private property, which was an even up barter if you were working for somebody, your body and labor in return for money. There is no capital gain there. That's an even up barter. And there's a man by the name of Joe Bannister that I'm going to go after. So you can hear him. And he's a former criminal investigation division of the IRS, and he quit the IRS. You can look him up on the web. There's a lot of derisive things that have been being said about this man. This man put his life on the line. We'll talk about taxes on another occasion. But here is a radio interview. Oh, before I get into that, before I get into the radio interview, Craig B. Hewlett, to show you exactly how much money is at stake and how much money is floating around in the system that you don't know about. Here's a little piece of kabuki theater, my opinion. Okay, but this is a report that was filed in the Wall Street Journal Markets, and if you take a look at the headline, it says, bank regulators roar at a $700 trillion market. By John Carney and David Riley on August 6, 2014, filed at 5:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And now here's this is how bad journalism has really gotten, because right these first two sentences, this is the way journalists write. This is not the way a news report's done, but this is the way journalists write. U.S. bank regulators have hit upon a novel way to herd cats. In this case, the felines are some of the world's biggest banks and investment managers, and the regulators' approach to getting them to work together on big changes to derivatives has been to show who is king of the jungle. Now, that is a terrible piece of journalism. But what's really going on is the second sentence. The Federal Reserve and Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation rebuked 11 banks Tuesday. They don't name the banks here. Oh, yes, they do. They do name the banks by directing the largest derivative banks. Yeah, they named the big three. But it goes on. The Federal Reserve and Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation rebuked 11 banks Tuesday over their so-called living wills. In rejecting the plans, the regulators also directed the banks to change on an industry-wide and firm-specific basis the way derivatives contracts are structured within a year. So in other words, they're using the pages of the Wall Street Journal to make the government look good against the big old banks. The big bad old banks. And they name in the story JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs. Right? Well, that's not the important part of the story. The important part of this story is that there's a $700 trillion market in derivatives that are being traded back and forth between the largest transnational hedge funds and the central banking cartels and the largest of the private banking cartels. That's what's going on. Now, what does that tell me? That tells me that there is a $700 trillion black hole of money that they're going to ignore as long as they want, which means that they can keep on printing money for as long as they want to keep these markets propped up. A lady by the name of Catherine Austin Fitz, who's got a name out there, has said on many occasions I've heard her that basically the theft of of the average person's wealth by inflation, because that's how theft occurs. It's done with inflation. Okay? You know, a car in 1960 was roughly $2,000. Now, the same kind of a car, or the equivalent, is $40,000. That's 20 times less purchasing power than 1960. That's 54 years ago. Okay? The inflation is what's stealing your money from you. and then they dump naked, what they call in the markets, a naked short. The Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Chase, all these large firms dump naked shorts on gold and silver, and they manipulate the dollar. Very pretty well known a financial commentator, Max Kaiser, talks about this in London just about every day of the week. Now, he happens to be being paid, I guess, by RT News. He's featured on RT News. I'm not too keen on RT News because that's Russia Today. I mean, that's a propaganda organization for Russia. That's all that is. But he's on RT News. At least Max is interesting. If you want to hear his commentary, he's quite a funny guy. Okay, but there's a lot of people that are into the idea that sooner or later, the only real store of wealth is going to be gold and silver. But they're keeping the price artificially depressed, and the American comics, the comics exchange, is a big joke. But that's another thing. $700 trillion in derivatives. Okay, that's how much money is floating around here. That's how much money is being traded in derivatives. That's the important part of this story. But I want to get back to Mr. Hewlett. So I think I showed you this, right? This is what they do all the time. This is not just one administration. This has been going on for administration after administration after administration. We'll have another report about that. But I'd like you to listen to a commentary by Mr. Hewlett on the Carl Nelson Show on WOL Radio, Washington, D.C., and let me bring it up here. It's an amazing interview. Let me bring it up here. All right, I got it up here. Let's see here. This is Craig B. Hewlett speaking with Carl Nelson of WOL out in Washington, D.C. proper. He must love this to be in on a program that the mainly the black population in the city spends a lot of time populating. Craig Nelson or Carl Nelson is a very popular radio commentator out there. Obviously, he's getting ratings, so they're doing it for the money, and he's got quite an audience. And this is Craig B. Hewlett speaking about elections on the Craig Nelson on the Carl Nelson Show. Excuse me, I keep on screwing up that name. Carl Nelson and Craig B. Hewlett on elections. Now listen to this. This is an amazing interview. Here we go.
Craig, let's talk about the elections. These young people, 2016 elections. I know you're familiar with Major Ed Daines. He doesn't think that there's going to be an election. Your thoughts?
He doesn't think there's going to be an election, period?
Right, that's what he's saying.
No, there'll be an election. Of course there'll be an election. Things are never as bad as we think. And, of course, they're never as good as we think either. So, I lack in that nature that I just heard the young lady mentioning. I mean, I love these people that are hopeful. I think the world is necessary that we have people that are hopeful. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those people. I believe in the power of negative thinking. Bad news doesn't.
What he was making a remark there, he's making a remark. A young lady was just on the air saying about, how she's hopeful and she's going to help get out the vote for the young people. That's what he's making a remark about here.
Depress me. I think the turnouts are going to be terrible. I think the young people, by and large, across the nation could give a damn about the elections. And I'm not sure I entirely blame them. When you look at the last two presidents, But seriously, go all the way back to George Bush Sr. I mean, who's actually been represented by anybody in the White House in the last 30 years, and who actually represents anybody in each and every district?
Now, another thing I'd like to preface while we're listening to this is on his website, if you go to Craig B. Hewlett, he says that he makes the claim, and I have no way of knowing whether the claim is correct or not. I would not doubt the claim one iota that after Bill Clinton was elected, he predicted that George W. Bush, years, 6 to 8 years before anything happened, that George W. Bush was going to be the next president of the United States. But let's continue to listen here. But that's the claim he made, and I believe him.
I track things differently than people, most people.
And when he's saying he tracks things differently than most people, one of his expertises is demographics. I've heard him make that a statement on many occasions.
There was a recent article, I think it was BuzzFeed or the Daily Beast, I'm not sure which it was, but the author was appalled by Karl Rove being out there calling on billionaires to raise money for the Republicans, to see that the Republicans hold the Senate, and like this is some kind of news. But what he failed to mention that the Democrat super PACs are doing the exact same thing with Democrats that are billionaires. Because when he compared the two, he compared the 2 weeks of the first 2 weeks of October, where the Democrats had raised only $39 million, and the Republicans raised $71 million. But if you go back for the entire year, the totals are $145 million by the Democrats and $174 million by the Republicans. So the point being, we've already lost the elections to money. I'm not sure what our vote actually accomplishes anymore than providing with the elite. Well, I'm going to get a lot of bad emails for this comment. Other than providing for the elite the illusion that's necessary that democracy is alive and well, that the elite need that illusion to be necessary and believable by the masses of people. They need us to believe that democracy is alive and well, and that our vote actually matters. But when you do the math and look at the money, look at what Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruling, and now there's great authors that are coming clean, like Martin Gillens, I think his name is pronounced, who wrote a book called Affluence and Influence. He was involved with the Swiss researchers.
And there's another book that you might want to look up called The Rich and the Super Rich by Ferdinand Lundberg. Now, that's something that you might want to do some research on. The Rich and the Super Rich by Ferdinand Lundberg. It's many years out of print. I read the book 30, 40 years ago, but nothing's changed. This has been going on at least during my entire life and my grandfather's entire life, my father's entire life. Anyways, all right, so let's continue.
That have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that we live in an oligarchy. We do not live in a democracy. There's nothing like a democratic system going on, and the people's views are not heard one iota according to the new scientific studies. And these aren't conspiracy studies. These are the best minds in the world that have finally figured out a way to put into a database electoral politics and who gets heard and who doesn't. And it's clear. We have nothing like a democracy. So what are our elections but an illusion for the elite that we're living in a free society based on Republican democratic principles, and nothing could be further from the truth.
And you still seeing Jeb Bush as a standard bearer for the GOP and the eventual winner?
Oh, yeah, that's the plan. You know, when I say Jeb Bush is going to be the next president, all I'm doing is I'm telling you what the elite believe they can achieve. In the last, 2 weeks before every election, that's when the money gets pumped into the system to guarantee who wins and who loses. It really is. It doesn't matter what goes on all year long. All this contest and speculation. Is Jeb going to run? Is Hillary going to run? Everybody that knows anything, if they're honest and be honest about the oligarchical system we're living with, already knows it's already decided it's going to be Hillary and Jeb. But it's because it's a circus. It's not because it's what the people want. The people aren't deciding anything. The two parties and the party platforms are deciding for us who we're going to be allowed to vote for. And we're going to get Hillary.
And that's important. Who we're going to be allowed to vote for. The Federal Election Commission, like I said, is put in place, and these people jockey that system. That's what they're doing. It's the money in politics. Now, it may, to some of you, this may be, well, what else is new? Well, then why are you voting? You're consenting to get your body taxed. You're voting in a fraudulent system that's totally gamed and manipulated by a psychological operation that's being put together by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. These are both corporations that all of this money gets funneled into. And the Democrats talk about how big money is so bad, and the Republicans talk about how their statism is so bad, and it's all a big game. It's all a big game. Fox News is in on it. They're all in on it. ABC, NBC, CBS, all the newspapers is owned by this. Okay? There are operatives all over the place.
Jeb. And at the last minute, the elite believe they'll pump the money into Hillary to get rid of all the Democratic challengers, leaving only her. Then they'll pump money into Jeb Bush to make sure he wins the primary. And at the end of the day, slander and libel will come out against Hillary. God knows she's vulnerable. And the media will be inundated with a huge amount of money for Jeb Bush, and he should win hands down.
It's all a big manipulation.
I know it for a fact.
Hold that thought right there, because when we come back, tell us if the other players in the races understand that that's what's going down. Folks, you want to speak to Craig? 800-450-7876. That's 800-450-7876. We'll take calls in less than 4 minutes right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
And now back to the Carl Nelson Show. On Washington, D.C.'s 1450. 1450 WOL Radio.
Before the break, Craig was telling us that it's basically set for 2016, and Jeb's going to emerge the winner. The question I have for Craig is Rand, Christie, Cuomo, who else? Elizabeth Warren, all these players. Romney, let's throw him in there. Cruz, do they know that this is theater going on and they're not going to win? And better yet, the money people, the Soros, the Koch brothers, Adelson, because they're the one who's signing the checks. Do they also know the end result?
Yes, they do. The ones that they're signing the checks without question know the end result, because they're the ones that sit in the room with the people that matter, the Dick Cheneys, the Rockefellers, the people that actually do matter in an oligarchy are the people with the money and the power and the brains that can hire the best brains in the world. You've heard me say it a dozen times. I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the room. But I do know for a fact that they've got the money, and they can hire 1,000 guys smarter than me, put them all in a room, pay them, and tell them, we want this to be the outcome, see that it happens. And that's how the real world works, both in the military, the intelligence community, and in politics and business. So,
and in this last election, the current sitting president of the United States, I read a number of reports, and I'm not going to get into it right now, but right after the election, I read a number of reports about counties in Ohio where there was a lot of voter anomalies in terms of how many votes were cast for Romney and how many votes were cast for the current sitting president. And let me tell you something. If Romney would have won Ohio, then the current sitting president would not be president. I think that's the way the electoral numbers would have played out. I might be wrong about that. But regardless, there was some hanky-panky going on there. But let's finish this interview out.
If you have no experience in politics, business, or the military, you may not find what I'm saying to be believable. But that's all I've ever done. Politics, military, and corporate. So I'm sorry. This is the way I know things get done. You don't have to believe me. But they'll sit down and actually have a cigar-filled room and a discussion saying, well, how do we guarantee Jeb Bush looks the most moderate to the American people when they finally get down to it? They say, well, it's simple. You fund people like Romney or Rand or anybody else that's more radical. Make sure that they've got enough money to be visible for a length of time in the first part of the year when the primary races are going on. And have them say the most ridiculous things. The people will turn away from that radicalism, leaving only what appears to be a moderate Jeb Bush. But I assure you, Jeb Bush is no moderate. I assure you, once he's the president, just like Obama, when he became the president, he became a completely different man. A man that stripped the country of our civil liberties almost single-handedly. And yet there's an article at the Independent, and he actually says this, I quote, has it come to pass that Mr. Obama's stock has fallen so far that even his most faithful friends, black Americans, can't be bothered to hear him out? I can't fathom it. African Americans may fret he hasn't achieved more, but they blame Republicans for getting in the way, not him. I know for a fact that's not true. When I've done your show these past years, your audience, mostly the black men in your audience, are completely aware of what Obama is and what he represents in the White House, and they don't make any distinction that he's black. They don't. I've done this show with you for a long time, but when I do other shows across the country, black men call in, sometimes black women, not often, but sometimes, will say, look, we know exactly what Obama's done. That's why we don't support Obama, and that's why we're walking out when he shows up to help a Democrat run for office. We get up and walk out because...
And there were reports of recently of people getting up and walking out at the end of one of his speeches before he could finish his speech.
We know what he's done because black people don't have the same problem with the black president that white people do. And that's just the truth of it. And black people are a hell of a lot smarter than white people give them credit for, including the author of this article who just wrote it, named David Osborne. Clearly, he's misinformed. I have found no indication whatsoever that black people have been duped by Obama, but I know a bunch of white people will be duped by Jeb Bush.
And there you have it. Yes. A lot of this particular segment is commentary from me, and it is my opinion. It's my opinion that this man knows what he's talking about. He is in the trenches with these people. They are his clients. He has been where he said he's been. I don't doubt for 1 second. I'm going to try and contact Mr. Hewlett. I may become a client just to sit in the same room with these people and watch and go to his camps. I don't know how much it costs. If we can raise enough money at the Critical Post Chicago, you buy our sunglasses or the CDs and stuff like that, and you support this broadcast. We're gonna find a way to get to this man. because this man knows things that the American population needs to know. And if nobody else is going to spotlight him other than Mills Crenshaw and Carl Nelson out there in Washington, D.C., and George Norrie on the odd occasion that he's on George Norrie's show, you know, we're going to make sure that this man is heard here. Anyways. Yes, here it is, friends. And it's not just this administration. It's been a lot of administrations. All you have to do is read J. Edgar Hoover's biography to know the way this country's run. There it is. All the big appointments from big companies into the administration, and most of them are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Well, that concludes this particular investigations report. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We've got some good stuff coming up.